From out of the lab and into the gym, it's the CoachMePlus Applied Sports Science Podcast.
Welcome to the first ever CoachMePlus podcast. I'm Kevin Dawidowicz, president and co-founder of CoachMePlus. I've got Doug McKenney, who's actually not that far from me. You're across the hallway in another room, and we have to do it this way so that we can actually get Skype to record this. Say hi, Doug.
Well, thanks for having me, Kev. Although we work together every day, it's kind of nice to be doing this via hall to hall.
Yeah, the one thing that, this is our first ever podcast. I think the stage that we want to set here with what we're doing is really try and keep things conversational with our coaches. I think that, our place in the industry is kind of unique. Like we're in the middle of just about everything. And with that, we don't really pick and choose what we think is best or what we think is, the proper way to go about things. Instead, we let coaches drive that decision. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good place to be too. I mean, the difference between different organizations and colleges, universities, professional sports, the things that they're doing may be similar in terms of collection, but different in, modalities and various different things. So I think we're in the right place.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to do. I think we're going to start off probably once every other week or so. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. And basically, what we'll do is we'll have coaches, we'll have wearable device companies, technology companies, different practitioners, and really just get, from the horse's mouth, what is the best way to do things in the applied way. Because I think what happens is in this industry, we go to a lot of these seminars, we go to a lot of these symposiums and stuff like that, and there's a lot of theory, right? Like there's a lot of places, a lot of professors, guys with PhDs standing up and going over what they learned in a study. But then, coaches try and take that back to the gym and do it themselves. And what they find in practice doesn't always apply, right? And that's where the applied sports science name kind of comes about in what we do.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily say that we're trying to find the best way. I think ultimately what we're doing is we're finding out, what's out there, what works, what potentially works, and then, what are some of the methodologies that are different. There could be several different things that work at different levels. And, obviously, a sports situation at a small college is going to be different than one that's at a major university or professional team. And yet they're coming to the same place with regard to sports performance. And so, it may not be necessarily that we're trying to find out, what is the best, but probably what works best in the situation you're in.
So, it's the reason that, obviously having you on our first conversation is because you and I have been longtime friends. We can try and figure this thing out, and I think we even agreed that even if it goes bad, we're just going to put it up because we don't have all data to be recording.
Yeah,
podcasts.
let's see what we can see if we can't not kill ourselves doing it.
Yeah. So a little bit of history. So you and I met. This is back 2002, 2003.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
Yeah, and. What was the problem? Because I know my side of the story, and I'm just a software guy. Nobody wants to hear, my side. What were you dealing with at that time, and what solution were you looking for? Like how did we come up?
Yeah, no, it's interesting dynamic there. Simply because when you start talking about this, a lot of older strength and conditioning guys will realize, we used to put together conditioning manuals, and these manuals were a collaboration of years of work that we had done, and, it wasn't that it wasn't effective to a degree. It was, but on the other side of the coin, we weren't able to really fit the individual aspect of the program to our players. We weren't reaching them effectively with regard to some of the designs that we were, putting in place in just one paper form packet, And so what I was, reaching out to you and commissioning you to help me do was to take that away from that, one handover manual to a player at the end of the year, and that's how he's going to run his programs. Yes, it's got his weight training cards, it's got his conditioning cards, it's got, some information on nutrition, it's got some information on recovery, it's got, various different things that, clearly was, somewhat effective back in maybe the 70s and early 80s. But when we got to the point of, really getting specific program design for players, we needed to get out of the manual and get into an online situation.
I tell you what, that was the biggest surprise to me. Like when we came and met, and I sat down with you the first time, you showed me the booklet. It was like this big thick nutritional manual and workouts and everything else like that. I was like, man, this is like my high school my high school program. Like I got it on paper. And I was really surprised, and no knock to you, but this is just the way the industry was back then. I was really surprised to see that pro hockey players, $1 million athletes, were going home with a paper book of workouts, and that blew me away.
Yeah, and the sad part of that is that we budget-wise we didn't have a lot of money to put into things, so every year we were trying to figure out a better system of doing this, and you helped us move from our manual to our CD-ROM, and then to a DVD, and then obviously online. And along the way, we realized, we need to become more interactive. We need to be able to work directly with the numbers that are coming in on a daily basis. We need to be able to recognize, where plateaus were being, created in our program, with individual players. Essentially the bottom line is that we had to get out of the dark woods and get into some light. And that was one of the ways that we felt we best do that, is get online and be able to present a good, solid program, individualized program to every one of our athletes, whether it was a NHL player, an AHL player, or a prospect. We draft guys at 18 years old, and you don't reach full maturation until 21. And so here we are, we've got 3 years, 4 years where this guy is going out of a manual that we don't actually even get to see what he's doing on a day-to-day basis. I think it hurt us, in a lot of circumstances. And I think, bottom line is we found a way to make it really effective.
Yeah, it's kind of funny when we were doing the CDs, it's one of those projects that would come up every year, and it always felt like it was, deadline was when it was never going to change. Obviously things had to go out, the season ended, like these things needed to get out there. And I remember a couple of late nights, burning CDs.
Yeah. Yeah. And the funny part is you're a 7-month season. We started this, looking into how we were going to make these changes with various different things in January, but you still run up against it when it's April, May, and June.
Yeah, and the crazy part is like you had one deadline, because if you didn't change what you put out there, like your plan was your plan and you're done and it goes out, good luck. Yep. You're not going to see those guys, right? Right. And the nice part about what we've developed now is that we could do 3-week segments, and we can make those changes over time, so we don't have to have this manual that was a 10, 12, 17-week program and hand it over at the end. You can give them 3 weeks now, or 2 weeks, and build it as you go, which is actually a very, very important aspect of sports science today. Yeah. I remember one of our NFL coaches, one of the first coaches to sign on from the NFL, was doing his programming, and he's like, well, I have a deadline. I need to have it done by this certain date. And we're like, no, you just need the first week done by the first week. Can you do that? And he's like, yeah, I can do that. And literally the guy learned and built like from the first day on as he grew. It was really interesting to watch.
Yeah. Happy days. Happy days for him, Yeah, it changes your whole sight line on how you want to do things, because if when you go back to the manual days, or the days when you had to, and it's not that your template could be still a 10, 12, 16-week template. It doesn't have to change that, but individually it could change, or you might have a segment of people that are in different types of programs, and so it makes it so much easier for you to handle and do it properly.
Well, I don't want to sound too much like a CoachMePlus commercial. Let's find out a little bit about Doug. So, your history. You were like literally the first full-time strength coach in the NHL.
Yeah, I was high. The better way of putting it, paid full-time strength and conditioning coach. My mentor, Rusty Jones, was with the Rusty, Pittsburgh Maulers, and he was hired with the Maulers and that franchise, which is a USFL football team, back in the 80s, and it folded, and when it folded, they basically said, well, why don't you work with our hockey team and our soccer team, and then eventually he got hired by the Bills, and so they hired me as their first full-time strength and conditioning coach, and I spent 4 years with the Penguins, and then the general manager that was there at the time, Eddie Johnston, was a great teacher to me as well in terms of hockey and how it related to what I was trying to bring to the table from the standpoint of sports science. And he asked me to go with him to Hartford when he went to the Whalers.
Well, hold on a second there, Doug. You called it sports science. Was it called sports science back then?
Hell no. No. It was and the funny part about that is that when you go and you get your degree in exercise science, and then back then it would have been physical education. Now there was some places may call it exercise science, but and then got my degree in exercise physiology. But there are only a couple schools that were really recognizing strength and conditioning as a concentration. Yeah. Now you have many schools that are doing that, and there are many colleges and universities that are also focusing in on sports performance. That's just a habit thing I got going on now with calling things sports performance. But I went 6 years with the Whalers, and then finished the last 20 with the Buffalo Sabres, and so incredibly different components to every one of those changes in time. The first 5 years to the next 5 years to the next 10 years.
So I mean, your first stint with a team, and I don't want to blow up anybody's spot, but I mean, you walk into a hockey team, NHL professional team. What's the weight room like? Like 30 years ago, like what did you guys like just lift those sandbags and stuff, like the old round dumbbells and
interesting part, EJ was the one who hired me, but Paul Martha, who was the president of the Penguins at the time, he was an NFL guy. He actually played in the NFL, and then with the Steelers and the Broncos, and became an attorney after, and then he was the president of the team, and he said, we really need this in hockey. We need strength and conditioning in hockey.
Sure.
And there really was no lie to that. When I walked into that facility, basically they had a few old Fitron bikes. A lot of people probably don't even know what those look like. And then a universal machine and a couple scattered plastic dumbbells that had sand in them. It was crazy.
Did you get those from Sears?
And I remember talking about jump training, and of course the terminology was plyometrics, and I remember one of the coaches saying to me, "We're not doing any of those plyometrics today, are we?" They had no clue, and whether when we were doing stretches, guys, typically just had no exposure, especially in hockey. It's not like in the 80s, we only had a few college athletes. Mm-hmm. A lot of them weren't in that league yet. It was mostly a junior hockey league that went into the NHL. And so, they weren't exposed to a lot of the stuff that, I had gone through with regard to the exercise science and physiology program. I got my master's. And so from hydration to nutrition to, the basics of static and dynamic active movements, and obviously strength and conditioning, was they just weren't exposed to it.
That first 5 years, I mean, you're basically walking into like what maybe be a high school gym now or a D3 gym now, but you're at the pro level.
Far less than that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that first 5 years, what's your emphasis? I mean, like, what are you trying to put in place? Obviously, like, there's not a lot of professional people doing what you're doing. So what's that first emphasis that you're really trying to get in place?
It was all education. It was all teaching. It was all about, spent a lot of time with a lot of athletes on nutrition, proper nutrition. I'm not a big supplementation guy. I really feel like the best avenue to go is to learn, how to eat properly, 3 meals a day, couple snacks, getting the calories that you're needed to reach the energy goals that are in front of you. And then, everybody knows this now, but at the time, you could look at things and say, well, okay, chronic fatigue, everybody talks about stress balance now, but back then, chronic and acute fatigue was not a conversation you were having, and, you look at how things are measured today, they weren't even close to being measured during that time frame. I was using heart monitors that were the size of a cell phone that you used on a harness. You couldn't wear them on the ice. You could only use them in the weight room on old Fitron bikes.
Well, what was the first heart rate monitor that you got?
I don't remember the name of it, but honestly, I'm telling you, it was the size of this right here, and you had it. It's crazy. And I began this process of thinking, how am I going to, first I had to get players on board, but I also had to teach the coaches and the general manager, about the culture of how this would work, having somebody there, and on a daily basis, we're going to be stretching, we're going to be lifting 2 or 3 times a week, we're going to be doing various different things, and just things that they weren't exposed to. So it was largely education.
Okay. So you're basically those first 5 years you're experimenting with refrigerator-sized heart rate monitors. They're lifting sandbags. You're educating your owners, GMs, basically stakeholders, coaches, whatever they might be, on why you're doing this stuff. So you got exposed to what I would say everybody's getting exposed to now, right? Like, you're constantly trying to re-educate the upper management on why you're doing these things, and you had to do that when there wasn't like data and information. There wasn't a whole lot of result-driven experimenting with what you were doing. So how did you, as a coach, and like, hey, I want to get some heart rate monitors in here, and they're like, a what? What's that? Like, yeah. How did that first experience in educating coaches, like, how did you live through that? Deal with that?
The thing about it is that we talk about player tracking today, and we look at the information that we are gathering on a day-to-day basis, and we were actually doing a lot of that at that time, but not at the level we're doing it now. Like, for example, we were looking at gains that were being made in the weight room via the same way that we do today. What is his load, and what is his volume, and what is how is his fat-free mass compared to what it was when we first got him?
Sure.
What's his percent fat? Is he losing fat? Is he gaining fat-free mass? We were tracking players, but we weren't doing it in terms of player load.
I'm talking about more like along the lines of the education side, like convincing the head coach that this was important.
Yeah, I think the part about that's funny is they almost said, we don't need to do this. We don't need to do this.
Sure.
Because they hadn't been exposed to it. They went into practice training camp, and we were doing 2 practices a day, and
wow.
We would have the delayed onset of muscle soreness, and they would be going to the training room, and then the trainers, packing ice bags on everybody. And then, when the trainer and myself would go back to the coach's office, and the conversation would be, well, why are these guys so sore? The conversation quickly got where while you're stretching them, why are they sore? Well, we're on the ice 4 hours, and
Wow.
we're gonna increase the chance for more, not just delayed onset of muscle soreness, but possibly pulls, strains, and tears. And so once they started to hear some of the arguments for it, some players obviously might have been, a lot more receptive because it means recovery. But on the other side, coaches are looking at the same thing they looked at year after year after year, which was we have to be prepared for our first game and we need to practice. And so
So
you had
so in so in
you
the
had to have that
80s, in the
conversation.
80s it was teaching these guys about DOMs, like just really basic.
And if we don't back off here, we're staring at pulls and strains and possible tears. And so that was the beginning of that process of people saying, what, we've got to back off here. And it wasn't the Players Association that was saying, we only want 3 hours a day, the first 2 weeks of training camp. It was actually guys like myself and the sports performance people who were saying, the smart thing to do is to have, a pattern of development with regard to their level of fitness and preparedness
Sure.
by virtue of getting a lot of hard work done in a short period of time and then allowing them to recover.
That's incredible. I mean, because it's funny because you and I have been on, we've been on the road together now for close to a year, and the challenges that we hear from coaches now who are looking at, monitoring, getting athletes compliance, all this other stuff, it's really still the same problem, right?
Yeah, essentially, you're right. I mean, I think though the awareness of professional sports coaches today is clearly much higher than it's ever been before. I mean, they still are concerned about, how physical their team can be and how, well conditioned they can be, and they want to drive their practice intensities at a higher level so that they can, feel as though their team can compete at a level that can win games. But at the same point in time, I think they understand that if their team isn't healthy, their chance for winning is reduced greatly. If their
Sure.
best players or their top players are the ones that are, performance levels are declining because they are fatigued, they are tired, they are sleep deprived or dehydrated or
Yeah.
glycogen depleted. I mean, those are the reasons that I think these coaches have started to come aboard. I think, obviously analytics has helped. But, like I said, we were tracking before, and from a practical applicational standpoint, I could have, feedback from players, and I could have, the way in and the way out numbers and the loss in fat-free mass, and I could put together various different things that would demonstrate, he's declining, he's not, he's catabolic, he's not anabolic, we got issues,
Sure.
You can measure some of those things not as effectively as you can today with all the apparatuses that we have, but we were trying to track and do things and do it in a practical way, communicating with those coaches and players daily about it.
So what I mean, you've how many head coaches have you?
Oh gosh, it's in the 20s.
So
Yeah.
so in 30 years, you've had close to 20-ish head coaches.
Oh,
if
yeah.
not more. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the sad part about that is that you finally, have gotten to a point where you've built a relationship with a coach, and he kind of understands I understand what he wants, and he understands what I think can help him, sort of thing. And then he's gone, and now you got to begin that process all over with, with somebody else coming in.
So for the for the college coach or for the first time, I'm a pro coach. I'm getting a new head coach coming in. I can't imagine anybody who's had more experience with a new coach. What's like the first salvo that you fire at the guy to figure out if he's going to get this stuff or not?
The one comment that I seemed to make that was most effective to almost every coach that I worked with was the next game is the most important game, because literally their thinking is, oh, we just lost 3 games in a row, or we played poorly and we need to practice.
Sure.
And yet our team is tired, and I'm telling them, we just got up, we just played 4 games in 6 nights. We're tired, we're dehydrated, we're obviously glycogen depleted. We have issues, the guys are tired. And his point of view would have been, well, our power play was terrible, and our penalty killing gave up this. And, we need to practice these things. And, my point to him would have been, well, the recovery will be more important than the work. Maybe we can just do video. Maybe we can do something that we can teach them without, expending a lot of energy and, sweating and reducing their preparedness from the physical standpoint. Let's increase their preparedness from a mental standpoint. And again, the line that I would always seem to have the best luck with in terms of getting them to realize that maybe a day off isn't a bad idea was, our next game is the most important game.
So next game's the most important game, and then what? I've talked to literally hundreds of coaches now, and everybody's got like a different technique or a different way that they've been able to kind of bridge that gap of, you say an athlete's glycogen depleted, and I'm like, I don't know what glycogen is. I'm just gonna go bag skate the guys. What was that first bridge of information sharing that really seemed to click with the majority of coaches that you worked with?
I'd take them right back to when most of these coaches were players. General managers and coaches were players.
That's a great point.
And so I would take them right back to a point in time when they were a player and say, do you remember when your legs were heavy? You couldn't, you were moving them, but they weren't going anywhere. That's glycogen depletion. So that's what your guys are facing right now. 7 of these top, 12 forwards have heavy legs. They're tired. That term glycogen depletion is the heavy legs. That's what's going on with them right now. The best thing that you can do for these guys is to keep them off the ice. Let me push, the nutritional side and the hydrational side with these guys, and let's make sure that, that they're prepared for our game on Friday.
Sure.
And so I would take it right back to a time where, they could have felt what it was feeling like. You get off the plane at 2:00 in the morning, you drive home, you're not in bed until 3:30, you can't fall asleep, and you still want to, are you sure you still want these guys to get up at 10:30? That would be a question that I would ask them.
Yeah.
And why can't we move practice to 12:30 and give them, the better chance of getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep?
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's the European and the Australian model and mindset is coming into the North American sports space, and the one thing that I keep hearing over and over again is, why are we here for this meeting? Why are we up here early again? Those guys are much further along with coaches buying in and understanding why there's certain points where you want to change what you're doing. There's a Australian coach I was having a conversation with, and he goes, "Yeah, it was Monday morning, and we're there at 7 a.m." And he goes, "Everybody's around the table. We're all looking at each other. We're all exhausted." And I go to the guy next to me. He goes, "Why are we here?" And coach goes, "We're supposed to be here. That's what we do."
Yeah.
And it's like, it's hard to kind of like unlock that mindset, but there is. And that's why I'm asking, what kind of bridge of information have you been able to share to kind of get that point across? And I think, it's going to be different for everybody, but obviously your experience is, really important to share.
Yeah, I think, like I said, once I was able to have some black and white numbers and things that were, from what we were collecting, our internal player load data and our external player load data and our RPEs and our questionnaires and our, once I had, black and white information, it was easier for me to win battles with coaches. Before it was more of, just simple stuff like weighing in and weighing out, and then, feedback from the players. Generally speaking, the trainers and the strength coaches are the first ones to see them.
Yep.
they come in and we're stretching them and we're doing various different work with them, and so we're having conversation, and we see them walk in the door and it looks like they got in a fight with their pillow. Their hair's all over the place. Their eyes are half closed, and it's just you can tell that they're tired. They're fatigued. And so you ask them, how you doing? Well, I'm beat. I'm tired. Didn't get to sleep last night. Now, before it was a verbal thing, but now there's, they pick up their phone, they enter in their wellness questionnaire, and we're getting that information before they even arrive there, and we're making some decisions, and we're having communications with the athletic trainers, the physical therapist, and the positional and head coaches on where guys are at.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, again, this is so much different than the 80s and 90s. It wasn't available. We weren't doing it. We were, we had these conversations. We were, from a practical applicational standpoint, we were, hitting these things, but not as effectively and efficiently as we do today.
Well, it's funny. I was talking to a high performance group yesterday, and these guys are they're a different kind of sport, and I can't drop any names, but basically it's as old school as you get, this sport, and the strength coach just started there like a week ago, and he walks in and he's looking at the facilities and he's watching the guys and everything else like that. And the guys travel 1-2 times a week. They're they're all over the place. And he goes, yeah, the supplement of choice here is Monster Energy drinks. that is the answer to everything. I'm tired, grab a Monster. I'm fatigued, grab a Monster. We got off the plane late, grab a Monster. That's it. Just rev up for the next performance and for the next game and for the next event and whatever it is. And they're just trying to compensate with caffeine. Yeah. And it's like caffeine, sugar, and taurine, or whatever the hell is those things.
You're absolutely right, Kevin. And I didn't think of it until you just said this, but it was not atypical for our guys to come in back in the 80s and 90s, and their first place to go was over to the coffee machine and getting a cup of coffee, and then to the training room to get a hot pack. I mean, it was, and you hardly even see hot packs used today.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go into training rooms, you hardly ever see them. But every day, those guys were going to the coffee, and that was their first trip to the coffee machine. They went 3 or 4 times. So ultimately, it's the same thing as you're talking about with this situation you're talking about today. And everybody knows that that's a diuretic. So we're defeating our purpose of having that much caffeine because we're also dehydrated, and so that message.
Wasn't there a goalie a couple years ago who blamed coffee for his?
Oh, I'm sure.
Dehydration. I'm sure. It was somebody who got pulled from a game, and he was like, coffee's my pregame, and didn't realize that that was.
Oh, I'm hoping you're not telling me that was somebody on my team.
It might have been.
Leave it alone, okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, but you hear stuff like that all the time. I mean, all we gotta do is look at the Super Bowl last year, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Your number one guy is on the field, pumping fluids, getting rolled, pulling out cramps, doing what they can to keep the guy on the biggest stage, and we can only assume so much, right? But it looks pretty apparent that might have been a dehydration issue.
It was, and it clearly was. And the sad part about that is that we have so much information today on how to deal with, being properly hydrated for, your important games, all your practices. And the sad part about it is that, you lose this guy, even if he doesn't get the ball the next play, he's a threat. He can't even be on the playing field. So, that would have been my biggest fear. Honestly, and I've had just like every other strength and conditioning coach or professional that's been in at this level. I've had situations where guys have pulled or they've strained. I've had guys that couldn't complete a game because they were cramping, and there's nothing that is more disappointing. And so once you've learned how to get all your players on the right page with how important that is, it really should never happen.
Yeah. Well, Doug, let's fast forward a little bit. So the 80s were lifting sticks and rocks and throwing sandbags and drinking coffee. The 90s, we got heart rate monitors the size of cell phones. You start getting into the 2000s. When you and I met, I think the first thing that you had that we talked about was maybe the Woodway treadmill, or was it First Beat that we were pulling data from?
Yeah, we had both. We actually had both.
Okay.
One of the first things that that we actually were trying to put into the package of tracking and looking at on a daily basis would have been the training effect,
okay.
Or TRIMP, which is actually our player load, internal player load.
How big was that? I mean,
huge. It was huge.
TRIMP didn't exist, right? Like before that, it was just looking at peak heart rates and time and zone, all this other stuff. Right?
Basically you were using heart rate monitors for exercise prescription.
Yeah.
You would actually, you'd have a VO2 or
try to get guys in their zones.
Yeah, and you would be using it in such a way that you could actually look at it and say, okay, well, he's, we need to be a little closer to the anaerobic threshold, or we need to do this and this and this. And it was primarily, for the most part, used off the ice by, almost the entire league and leagues in general, whether not just the National Hockey League, but, you were primarily using a lot of that stuff, off the playing surfaces. You're using it in your conditioning or off ice or
but like you said, it's a prescription. Like go on the treadmill and run up to 80% of your heartbeat for X amount of whatever's, and right, like that was it. But TRIMP was like a result.
It was, and essentially what happened was that we got to the point where we realized, we can determine not just from, the load of what was being done from calories. We could actually break this down and look at, what the chronic and acute, loads were over a period of time, and be able to master, I don't know how to use the word master, but really come up with some really good diagrams as to, where a guy potentially is running up against the wall, from week to week. In hockey, we were playing between 3 and 4 games a week, and we knew what that was costing through these heart rate monitors and internal load. We were kind of figuring exactly about how much that was costing. I'll say, now, what are we going to do with the other 3 or 4 days? Okay, we're going to give them 1 day off. All right, what are we going to do with the other 2 or 3 days?
Sure.
And now we could actually, target our practice number from player load as to where it's most safe in terms of elevating their performance levels, but at the same point in time, keeping them injury-free. And that was just a whole new dynamic to how we were approaching, the day-to-day conversations with the players and the coaches, and how we could best, serve the organization, as a whole.
How long did it take you to get comfortable with that number? I mean, again, let's kind of fast forward to now. People get new numbers and they're trying to learn, what does this fatigue number mean? What does this load number mean? I got some GPS data, whatever it is. You were exposed to TRIMP for the first time ever. You've got, 10, 15 years of experience behind you, and now you've got like this new amazing tool. How long did it take you to really understand it?
It's a great question.
I always have great questions.
Essentially, it took a good 2 years before I could, and I remember this conversation with the head coach at the time. I went to him and I said, "Here's the proof of what I'm telling you," and he's going, and his question to me was, "Are these numbers sound? Are they good? How do you know that these are?" And I said, "I'm 95%, 99% sure that what I'm telling you right here is sound information." And it wasn't it was 2 years after we began that process.
Wow.
So I mean,
how did
and
you
that's
get back to the buy-in? How did you get? Or you were already doing heart rate monitors, so it's not like you had to get buy-in to do this, but it was something new that you were kind of running in the background. Like, how did that work out?
no, we were using heart rate monitors primarily off the ice, and then I moved them onto the ice, and so I'm collecting this data, but I'm not really capable of sharing any of this information with
Sure.
either. Players would come and ask, what do you, and I'd show them their curves, and I'd say, you're in really good shape. I could say that because I'm looking at the bout of work, and then I'm looking how fast he recovered from that bout of work.
Yeah.
But in terms of the total body of information that I was getting from it, I could say, well, you're approximately burning X number of calories, and so I was providing some information. But in terms of the real critical information that it was able to provide us over time, it started with, the typical practice was, 45 minutes to an hour and 5 minutes. And, okay, here's the normal trim for this player and this trim and this player and this player. And then, okay, well, that was an extremely hard practice. And here was a hard practice and an average practice and a recovery practice. And over a period of time, I put together this table of information that allowed me to say, okay, I get it. I understand the dynamics of how this works. And now I can, okay, so we're playing 3 games this week. We got 4 days. We're going to get a day off. How are these 3 days going to work? How much of a trim value does this guy have to deal with over this period of time? And I began to take this stuff to the coaches and share it with them. And but like I said, it took me, the better part of a full year of collecting this data to fully understand what I wanted to do with it, and then the second year to design and implement stuff that I could show to the coaches and the players, where I felt really comfortable about saying, you know what, this is where we need to go with this.
So you had this golden nugget of information, right? Like this new thing that now is just commonplace. Everybody does it, but it took that long to actually get value out of it.
Yeah. And maybe because I'm not real bright, I don't know, but but it did take a good portion of time, and once I had it, and once I was being able to share it, it was amazing how the players grabbed it and wanted it and appreciated, your effort, your knowledge, and where you're driving things. But additionally, the same thing with the coaches, so. One of the coaches had said to me, he had since moved on to another team, and he said to me, you were right. And I said, well, what do you mean? I didn't know what he was talking to me. He goes, we didn't skate one time during the playoffs. Not one time we didn't skate. And essentially it was what we were talking about back in a time when it was pretty critical, and I had these numbers to support what I was saying. And, he had the experience of being a playoff coach and knowing how to push guys to a certain point and then back off and push them to a certain point. And I was bucking up against that because I had these numbers and I was saying it to him. And, so he didn't necessarily go along with what I was saying. And then, later on he came back and said, you were right. We needed to back off, and we didn't. Yeah. And, so those are the types of confirmations that you like to have when you're dealing with, professionals that, are decision makers, and they feel like their success and what's driven them and what's helped them to get to the place they are is, and it still does have a stranglehold on their decision making. But if somehow or another you can, get to a point where there's enough trust with what you're doing that, you can curve their ideas. And I believe, there are a lot of sports science guys that are out there today that are able to do that. And I think coaches are more open to that. And we're in a better place than we've ever been before.
So, this is, this is the interesting part. You've been in the NHL for 30 years. I don't want to say you've lived in a bubble, but you've lived from your perspective, right? Like as a strength coach in the NHL outward. and you've been exposed to what the industry is doing and everything else like that. But I think you and I were talking about this when you first joined the team, that you'd never been to like any of these events that we're going to now, like the NSCA, CSCA, MIT Sloan, like all these things. You've never been exposed to any of these places. You might not have been exposed to the teams that we're working with and what they're doing, different sports and soccer and all this other stuff. So you've kind of gotten out of, you've gained the perspective of being outside of that bubble now, right? Like you're not in the NHL at the moment. You're not looking at it from trying to make a coach happy and trying to make players happy. You're looking at it from everybody else's perspective and gaining that insight, which I think is probably a really interesting spot to be in, because a lot of people are, they might be young and they're coming up and they're going through that and they're trying to figure out, where do I apply this? And you've been applying it for 3 decades, and now you get to see, what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, and, it's actually been really eye-opening, and for many reasons. One, you're right. The first, when you're in a league and you're in your job and you're doing it, it's a grind, and you're grinding it all the time. Mm-hmm. I remember my first, 10 years, I used to go to the American College of Sports Medicine meetings every once in a while, or I'd go to the NSCA meetings every once in a while. And as you said, recently I've been traveling to all these and talking to a lot of strength coaches and a lot of sports performance professionals and coaches, athletic directors, general managers. And so the perspectives are, so different to me, because when you're in that grind and you're doing that every single day, one of the things that happens is you always feel like you're chasing. You always feel like you're not doing enough, and that you're not doing what everybody else is doing. And one of the nice things that happened for me was, the first 5, 6, 7 places that I went to, I realized, what? We were doing a lot of good things. It was a great confirmation for me. But on the other side of the coin, I realized also that, wow, there's some really great stuff going on out here that, you just don't know about, and you think you're staying on top of things, and you think that, you can be watching all kinds of things on the computer, from presentations that are being done all over the world, and you feel like you're staying on top of things, but you miss a lot, because you're grinding and you're in that situation and you're trying, like,
got to win the next game. Yeah.
And you're dealing with a player who's not making gains, and you've got a general manager that's saying, why isn't this guy better than what we thought he was going to be? And
he looks fat, so you're always,
you're always, like I said, chasing. You're chasing a lot of different things, and at the same time you're feeling like maybe you're not getting enough done. But at the same point in time, what I've realized is that it's incredible how different various different places are doing things. They may be doing them the same, getting the same type of information, but they're doing it so differently than what we were doing. And the technology that's out there today, is and it's not going away, and it's only going to grow. And how do you implement a lot of that stuff? Like, we were using Tendo units. Well, we got good at it. And, but there's so many other things that you can use that, is just as good, but I wasn't, fully aware of a lot of those things. The same things with, GPS units. There's a lot of different units that are out there that you can look at, and different teams are using them different ways. And I've found out, through being away from where I was, and essentially, being able to have conversations with them, what I would do perhaps maybe a little differently, and even be able to share some of my knowledge and expertise with things that worked really well for me, that's related to what they're doing.
So, I mean, it's funny because, like, we do this all the time, and, watching you get excited about certain things, it's like, you can see that spark again. And when we're on the road and you get to engage with other coaches and what's going on, like you see that spark again. It's like, oh, Doug's got something there. Like there's something going on. There's something going on that's like getting his gears going. So, hundreds of coaches. We've got, a bunch of teams that we work with. We're on the road. What would you say is like your biggest surprise in different sports? Like you've got all these different sports that you've seen, all these different types of coaches and everything else like that. What was the biggest surprise that you've seen out there?
I think the biggest surprise I have right now may not necessarily be with a particular team or organization or university or anything. I was always under the impression that when I first came in, what I wanted to be able to do was I wanted nutrition, sleep, and rest to be my focus with our teams.
Sure.
And, I really hit the nutrition part hard. I did 3-day, analysis. I did, I set up the pregame meals, the postgame meals, and, and I taught and I educated guys about the nutrition. And I realized, how do you measure that? Well, there's a really lot of difficult ways to measure it. And, with technology today, you can use apps and different things like that. But really, the bottom line, in terms of measuring measuring nutrition, is body composition. It's simple. You're gaining fat-free mass, or maintaining it, or you're losing, fat mass. So the bottom line is, it's an easy measurement. And the funny part about it is, there's tons and tons of organizations that only measure body composition once a year.
Yeah,
it's beyond me.
Wow.
They do it at training camp, and then they don't do it again. There's a lot of them, and it shocks me because I think to myself, well, how do you know how your nutrition is? Well, we feed them every day. And the same thing with hydration. You have some very simple methodologies to feed. Yeah, you can do more complex ones, but you have a very simple one of weighing in and weighing out, knowing what the fluid loss is, and then from there, getting the electrolytes in first. And, so there's this really simple process of going through hydration and teaching players about hydration. Yet, when you talk to individuals and teams about how they do it, oh, well, we just pound it. We just pound it.
That's always my favorite. Yeah, that always blows me away. We just pound nutrition. We just pound hydration. Are you just like cramming good burgers into the guy's face?
They're taking the water bottles and pouring it in their mouths, and they're measuring how much. But they really, and it's a very simple thing to teach and educate and make sound, and then you get to the recovery part, and the same thing holds true. Well, how do you know what's right for recovery? And there are many, many, many teams that are doing a great job of knowing, about how much calories are being expended and what the player load is from the internal and external aspects of it. And they've come up with, some really great algorithms for all of it, from wellness questionnaires to, RPEs, and there are a lot of ones that are doing it really, really well. But it's surprising to me, some of the ones that just say, well, no, basically we got a really good feel for when they're tired. It shocks me. And then the last one of that nutrition, sleep, and rest is that, the sleep part of it is still an enigma. There's not a good enough product out there yet, and yet there are so many companies that are trying to figure out that technology that brings you over the top.
Well, you and I were at the NFL team last week, and they were looking at 6 different technologies and asked us our opinion. And honestly, I can't recommend one yet.
Yeah,
right?
It's not there yet.
You've got the movement sensor, you've got basal body temperature, skin galvanization, you've got a little thing that you can put next to your bed and get a beacon and listen to your heart, breathing patterns, and then you're looking at heart rates, and there's so many different ways of doing it. We're confused, and we do this all the time. I have 150 different device companies that we monitor all the time, and I haven't bought a sleep monitor because I still don't know which one's best. And that's for my own personal use. And, and you get these teams, I was like, which one do you recommend? It's like, don't know yet. Yeah. Honestly, I don't know yet. And, you can throw in fatigue monitors, like Whoop is doing fatigue monitoring. Beddit has the thing that you lay across. Do you go really cheap and simple with a Fitbit? Do you go to Fatigue Science and go really high end? And do you bring in a third-party consultant like Rise Science? Like, which one of these is the best way to do it? And you can go from like super cheap, tell me how you slept last night, to way up here, $2,000, $3,000 a guy a year to figure out exactly what the hell's going on. And you're right, there's no really super effective way to do this yet. But then again, this is how everybody figures it out, right? Everybody goes through the devices.
I think that's the point I was trying to make is when I first started answering that question was that's the biggest surprise to me over, what I've found, being in the setting that I'm in now where I'm going and talking to people. Well, I realize that some people are doing it well and some people aren't doing it well with regard to nutrition and recovery. But my biggest surprise is that we really don't have anything then in terms of sleep that I feel, and apparently you do as well, that, gives us enough information to really take somebody in that direction and say, okay, this is where what works best and how it can really be helpful. The questionnaires, it's got its limitations. How many hours did you sleep and how restful do you feel and how's your mood? And, that's a very, very helpful thing to our sports performance people, but it isn't the same as having a really good solid number for REM sleep, for deep sleep, for light sleep, and how many hours are we actually getting and how much do we actually need, to perform at our highest levels. And so, that was my biggest surprise.
So it's kind of funny. I'm looking at the clock here, and we want to keep this around an hour, and it's ticking.
Is it?
Yeah, man, it's ticking.
Oh.
It's good to kind of just get into this conversation. It's something I could do all day long. So I'm glad that the time kind of flew by through this. So you personally, obviously, what's your you've been out of the NHL now for 10 months.
No, it's 10 months. Yes,
10 months. So beyond CoachMePlus, what are you excited about over the next year, and looking at being able to do? I guess I've given this some thought in the fact that I certainly loved my experience in the NHL and working directly with a team. I do miss the fact that you build relationships with the players and the coaches, and you have this camaraderie, and it's certainly something that I do miss. But from the standpoint of what I do next and where I'm going, I'm not certain. I'll definitely be excited to talk, with any teams that approach me. But on the other side of the coin, I really, really enjoyed being in a situation where I can go and talk to young strength and conditioning coaches all over the place, and share, their knowledge with mine. And that's the light I'm talking about, man. You get excited about it. Yeah, it's really been fun. I tell you, I've met some really great young guys, and really, really have found, I think, a great place with where I am in saying, I love what you're doing. Can I make a suggestion or a recommendation? And, for them to say, oh, yeah, absolutely, makes me feel really good. And then to be able to share that information with them. And, whatever happens. I'm very strong in my faith. I believe that, God's going to direct me. And so, for me, whatever I'm doing, I'm just going to do it 100% and make sure that, I have, if I can, have an impact with the people I'm working with. It's the only way to live, buddy.
Yeah, thanks, man.
All right, so that wraps up our first CoachMePlus podcast. This was Doug McKenney, former strength conditioning coach in the NHL. And Doug, any last word you want to throw in there?
No, I just want to thank you for having me be able to be part of CoachMePlus. I'm enjoying it, and I know that anybody who has an opportunity to use this system will really appreciate its value.
Thanks. So if you're listening in your car, you're on your lift or in an airplane or something like that, hope we made the ride a little bit easier. And if you subscribe to our podcast, you'll be able to get it. We'll probably be putting these out once every other week or so. We also have the Applied Sports Science newsletter. You can go to CoachMePlus.com to subscribe to that and get information about the industry and understand exactly what's going on. We try to make it as open as possible and not markety, trying to get people to understand exactly what the latest might be in either research, white papers, wearable devices, technology, trends in the industry, and really we're just providing it as a way to educate and not choose or pick what we think is the best, but really just make you guys aware of what's happening. So again, go to CoachMePlus.com, apply and subscribe to the newsletter, and of course, whatever app you're using to listen to the podcast, make sure you subscribe to that as well, and hopefully we'll see you guys again in 2 weeks. Thanks again, Doug.
You bet.
All right.